Christmas music drifted softly through the first-class cabin, while passengers settled into wide leather seats. Tiny garlands hung above the aisle, and warm golden lights reflected against polished surfaces, making everything feel calm and welcoming. For a moment it looked like the kind of Christmas memory people carried for years. "Daddy, look," a little girl whispered from across the aisle. "The plane has Christmas decorations," her father smiled. "It does, pretty nice, huh?" A few rows ahead, Amara Brooks placed her coat neatly beside her seat. She had spent months away from family, and this flight was supposed to be the final stretch before home. She looked out the window, watching airport workers move beneath the glowing runway lights. A flight attendant stopped beside her. "Welcome aboard, ma'am. Can I get you anything before departure?" "Just water, thank you." "Of course." The attendant smiled and moved on. Across the cabin, Victoria Langford adjusted her designer handbag and scanned the passengers around her. Her eyes paused briefly on Amara, then she looked away. Nearby, two businessmen spoke quietly. "Full flight tonight?" "Almost. Holidays always pack these routes." The cabin filled with soft conversation, the kind strangers make when everyone is trying to enjoy the season. Amara checked a photo on her phone. Her family stood around a Christmas tree, smiling into the camera. "You better not miss dinner this year," her sister had texted earlier. A small smile appeared on her face. "Trying my best," she had replied. For a few seconds, everything felt normal, but Victoria's gaze drifted back toward Amara. She frowned slightly. Not enough for anyone to notice, not enough for anyone to question, just a quiet judgment forming behind polite eyes. The aircraft door closed. A flight attendant welcomed everyone over the speaker. "Merry Christmas, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be departing shortly." Passengers applauded lightly. The little girl hugged her teddy. Amara slipped her phone away and relaxed. She had learned long ago how quickly peaceful moments could change. Sometimes it started with a look, sometimes a question, sometimes a silence, and as the engines slowly came alive beneath the aircraft, an invisible tension settled into first class beside the Christmas cheer. No one could see it yet, but it had already taken its seat. The gentle hum of the engines settled beneath the cabin floor as passengers adjusted their seatbelts. Amara rested her hands in her lap, breathing slowly. She had spent years living by schedules, board meetings, and impossible deadlines. Today, none of that mattered. All she wanted was to reach home before Christmas dinner and hug the family she had missed for far too long. Her phone vibrated one last time before airplane mode. Her mother had sent a simple message: "Travel safely. We're waiting." Amara smiled, typed, "I'll be there soon. Save me a slice of pie," then slipped the phone into her purse. Across the aisle, an elderly man noticed her smile. "Heading home for Christmas?" he asked warmly. "Yes," Amara replied. "It's been a long year." "I hope it's worth the wait." "It always is." The brief exchange ended naturally, leaving only comfortable silence between strangers. Amara leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't thinking about business deals or corporate reports. She wasn't thinking about interviews or investors. She simply pictured her young nieces running toward her at the front door, arguing over who would get the first hug. Those quiet thoughts softened the exhaustion hidden behind her calm expression. Nearby, Victoria watched the interaction without saying anything. Her eyes moved from Amara's modest coat to her handbag, then to her first-class boarding tag resting beside the armrest. Something about it seemed to bother her. She crossed her arms. A flight attendant walked past and smiled politely at both women. before continuing toward the galley. No one noticed the growing tension except Victoria herself. Amara remained completely unaware. She looked out the window as snowflakes drifted beneath the airport lights, silently reminding herself that peace was sometimes found in ordinary moments. She had boarded this flight carrying only gratitude. Before the aircraft even left the ground, someone else had already begun carrying suspicion instead. The cabin doors were now sealed, and the final safety checks continued with quiet efficiency. Flight attendants moved gracefully through first class, offering blankets, collecting coats, and answering small requests with polished smiles. Everything looked orderly, almost perfect, as though kindness alone could guarantee fairness. "Would you like another bottle of water, ma'am?" one attendant asked Amara. "No, thank you. I'm perfectly comfortable. Please let us know if you need anything." "Thank you." The attendant smiled and continued down the aisle. Moments later, Victoria lifted a finger. "Excuse me." "Yes, ma'am?" "My pillow isn't fluffed properly. I'm sorry. I'll replace it immediately. And make sure this cabin stays quiet." Of course, the exchange lasted only seconds, yet everyone nearby noticed how quickly the request was answered. A younger flight attendant watched silently before whispering to a colleague. "She always expects special treatment." Her coworker lowered her voice. "Just keep her happy. It's easier, even if she's unreasonable. We avoid complaints whenever we can." Those words lingered longer than either intended. Amara heard nothing. She remained focused on the snowfall outside, unaware that decisions were already being shaped around the loudest passenger instead of the fairest outcome. The junior attendant glanced toward her. "She seems pleasant," she whispered. "No," the senior attendant replied softly. "But sometimes peace means giving difficult people what they want." The younger woman frowned. "Does it?" No answer came. Another announcement welcomed everyone aboard and wished them a Merry Christmas. Passengers smiled politely. The crew returned those smiles with practiced warmth, hiding the quiet pressure that came with protecting the airline's image above everything else. No rule had been broken. No accusation had been spoken. Yet an invisible habit had already taken control, rewarding confidence over fairness within minutes. That habit would demand a price from the one passenger who had asked for nothing. Victoria's folded arms tightened as she continued watching Amara through narrowed eyes. The quiet confidence that had once looked harmless now seemed suspicious in her mind. She leaned toward the aisle, unable to keep her thoughts to herself any longer. "Excuse me," Victoria said sharply. Amara turned politely. "Yes? I think you're sitting in the wrong seat." The words hung in the air. Amara blinked once, surprised but calm. "I'm sorry?" "First class is up here," Victoria continued. "Economy is farther back." A nearby passenger looked up from his magazine. Amara answered evenly. "This is the seat printed on my boarding pass." Victoria gave a short laugh. "I don't think so." Holiday conversation around the cabin faded almost instantly. The little girl across the aisle stopped talking to her father. Two businessmen exchanged uncertain glances but remained silent. A flight attendant noticed the tension and approached. "Is everything all right, ladies?" Victoria answered before Amara could speak. "I believe she's sitting in the wrong seat." The attendant looked toward Amara with a polite but uncertain smile. "May I see your boarding pass, ma'am?" Amara reached calmly into her purse without showing the slightest irritation. "Of course." As she handed it over, another crew member quietly watched from the galley. The boarding pass clearly matched the seat number. For a brief second, the attendant hesitated. Instead of correcting Victoria immediately, she glanced toward her senior colleague. Neither woman spoke. The silence spread through first class. Victoria crossed her arms again and said loudly, "This seat belongs to people who actually paid for it." No one answered, but the Christmas warmth inside the cabin disappeared before the plane had even left the ground. The words settled over the cabin like heavy snow, quiet yet impossible to ignore. Victoria remained standing beside her seat, her expression calm enough to appear reasonable, yet every sentence carried an unmistakable message. "I don't want to embarrass you," she said loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "Mistakes happen. You should simply return to your assigned section." Amara met her eyes without raising her voice. "There is no mistake," Victoria smiled thinly. "People often get confused when boarding." A businessman lowered his newspaper but said nothing. Another passenger whispered, "She's making assumptions." His wife sighed. "I know," Victoria continued. "First class has certain standards. I'm sure you understand." The remark stung more because it sounded so polished. Christmas music still floated gently through the speakers, but no one seemed to hear it anymore. Amara folded her hands. "I understand respect," she answered quietly. That should be enough. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across several faces. The young flight attendant looked toward her supervisor, silently hoping someone would finally end the confrontation. Instead, the senior attendant remained still. A little girl across the aisle tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mom," she whispered, "why is that lady being mean?" Her mother hesitated before answering. "I don't know, sweetheart." The child frowned. "But the nice lady isn't doing anything." No one responded. Passengers exchanged uncomfortable glances, each waiting for someone else to speak first. Victoria interpreted their silence as agreement. She lifted her chin confidently, believing the cabin stood behind her. She didn't realize those silent faces were no longer watching Amara. They were beginning to watch her, quietly remembering every word she chose to say, while doubt spread through the cabin like a shadow no one could ignore. The lead flight attendant stepped forward with a reassuring smile that seemed meant to calm the cabin more than uncover the truth. "Good afternoon," she said. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding," Victoria answered immediately. "It certainly is. This woman is occupying the wrong seat." Without questioning the claim, the attendant turned toward Amara. "Ma'am, may I ask you to come with me for a moment?" Amara looked at her calmly. "Would you like to see my boarding pass first?" A brief pause followed. "Yes," the attendant replied. Amara removed the pass from her purse and placed it gently into her hand. "There you are." She offered no explanation, no complaint, and no demand for an apology. The attendant studied the ticket. Her expression changed almost instantly. The seat number matched. She looked again, then quietly glanced toward another crew member standing nearby. Their eyes met for only a second. Something wasn't right. "What is it?" Victoria asked impatiently. The attendant forced a polite smile. "Just one moment, please." A nervous whisper passed between two crew members. "Everything matches." "Are you sure?" "Yes." Neither spoke loudly enough for the passengers to hear. The cabin grew even quieter. Several travelers noticed the crew exchanging uncertain looks, yet nobody understood the reason. The senior attendant hesitated, trapped between correcting the mistake and protecting the confidence she had shown only moments earlier. Finally, she lifted the intercom phone and spoke softly. "Captain, could you come to first class, please?" Only a minute later, she lowered the receiver and faced Amara. Her voice remained professional, but the confidence was gone. "Ma'am," she said carefully, The captain has requested to speak with you. Victoria smiled. Amara simply stood. The captain entered first class with steady steps, his calm expression carrying the quiet confidence that usually settled nervous passengers. He nodded politely toward Victoria before briefly looking at Amara. I understand there's been a seating issue, he said. Victoria answered before anyone else could. There certainly has. I've been trying to explain that she doesn't belong here. The captain gave a small, understanding nod. I see. The lead flight attendant handed him Amara's boarding pass. He glanced at it for only a moment before returning it. Ma'am, he said gently, perhaps we can avoid delaying the flight. Amara looked at him steadily. My boarding pass is correct. I'm not suggesting otherwise, he replied carefully, but sometimes the easiest solution is the one that keeps everyone comfortable. She tilted her head slightly. Comfort for whom, Captain? The question lingered. He hesitated only briefly. Simply trying to prevent unnecessary conflict, Amara answered without emotion. I didn't create the conflict. Several passengers exchanged quiet looks. The businessman across the aisle whispered to his wife, he's asking the wrong person to compromise. She nodded. Because it's easier. The captain continued in the same measured tone. If you'd be willing to take another seat temporarily. We'll resolve everything after boarding. Amara studied his face. She realized he believed he was being fair. That made the moment even heavier. Without another word, she reached for her coat and small handbag. I'll stand, she said quietly. The little girl across the aisle frowned. But she was sitting there first. Her father gently squeezed her shoulder. Not now. Amara stepped into the aisle with calm dignity, refusing to let humiliation change her expression. Victoria settled comfortably into her seat, crossing one leg over the other. I appreciate common sense, she said with satisfaction. No one answered. Instead, whispers quietly spread through the cabin. I saw the boarding pass. So did I. Then why did he ask her to move? The questions remained unanswered. The aircraft still waited at the gate, but something far more important had already begun moving. For the first time, passengers stopped trusting the loudest voice automatically. They started watching every decision instead. And although Victoria believed she had won, doubt was quietly taking her place beside every witness in first class. Amara remained standing beside the aisle, one hand resting lightly on the handle of her bag. Around her, the cabin stayed unnaturally quiet. The Christmas decorations hanging from the overhead bins seemed strangely distant now, as though their warmth belonged to another world. She lowered her eyes for a moment, and familiar memories quietly returned without invitation. Years earlier, she had entered a luxury hotel where she was scheduled to deliver the opening speech at an international business conference. A smiling guest had stopped her. Excuse me, he said, handing her 2 heavy suitcases. Could you take these upstairs? Amara had smiled gently. I'm actually speaking at the conference. The man froze, embarrassed, while nearby employees looked away without saying a word. Another memory followed. She walked through an expensive boutique searching for a Christmas gift for her mother. Every few steps a security guard appeared behind her. She turned politely. Can I help you? No, ma'am, he answered quickly, yet he never stopped following. Then came another boardroom. An investor entered, shook hands with 3 white executives and asked, when will the CEO arrive? One executive quietly replied, she's already here. The room had fallen silent. Standing inside the aircraft, those moments blended together until they no longer felt separate. Different places, different faces, the same quiet assumption. The captain's decision had not created the wound. It had simply reopened one that had never completely healed. Still, bitterness never reached her heart. Her father had once told her, "People may question your place, but never question your character." She had carried those words longer than any title or achievement. Amara slowly lifted her head. The cabin returned to focus. Passengers were still watching, some with guilt, some with confusion, some with growing regret. For the first time, she noticed that even the crew no longer looked certain. Something had shifted. The silence around her no longer belonged only to fear. It belonged to doubt. And somewhere beyond the closed cockpit door, a truth far larger than a seating dispute had already begun finding its way toward first class. Amara remained standing quietly, her posture unchanged despite the attention surrounding her. Across the aisle, the young flight attendant who had questioned the situation earlier could not silence the uneasy feeling growing inside her. While the senior crew focused on keeping passengers calm, she slipped toward the service station and opened the electronic passenger manifest. She whispered to herself, "Let's just make sure." Her finger traced each name until it stopped. Amara Brooks beside. The name was a restricted symbol she had never seen, attached to an ordinary passenger. She leaned closer, reading the confidential notation twice. No way. She blinked and checked the seat number again. Everything matched. A secure designation appeared beneath the reservation, followed by an instruction visible only to authorized crew members. Her heartbeat quickened. This can't be right. She refreshed the screen. The information remained unchanged. She hurried to the lead flight attendant and spoke carefully. "Ma'am, could you look at this for a second?" The senior attendant barely glanced over. "What is it?" "I think we've made a mistake. We already handled it. Please." "There's a confidential marker beside Ms. Brooks's reservation," the lead attendant sighed. "Probably a VIP traveler. It looks more important than that. We don't have time to reopen this, but I said it's under control." The younger attendant fell silent, though every instinct told her otherwise. She returned to the galley, unable to stop thinking about the hidden record. Behind her, the cabin remained outwardly calm. Victoria relaxed comfortably, convinced the matter was finished. The captain had already returned toward the cockpit. Passengers resumed quiet conversations, though their voices lacked the warmth they carried before the confrontation. The young attendant looked once more at the screen. The confidential designation still waited there, untouched by opinions louder than every accusation spoken in the cabin. She closed the tablet slowly. "The truth is still here," she whispered. No one heard her, but she knew the airline system had already recorded everything that human assumptions had ignored. Soon, facts would speak with an authority that prejudice could no longer silence. Amara remained standing near the aisle, her hands resting lightly around the handle of her small carry-on. The quiet inside the cabin wrapped around her once again, but this time the silence carried something different. While passengers continued forming opinions about the woman before them, none of them knew the years that had shaped the calm expression on her face. She remembered a tiny brick house where every dollar mattered. Her father worked long shifts repairing machines while her mother accepted every extra hour she could find. One Christmas morning, her father smiled and said, "We may not have everything, but we will never lose our dignity." Those words had stayed with Amara far longer than any gift. Years later, She earned a scholarship through relentless study. Leaving home had frightened her, yet she refused to waste the opportunity her parents had sacrificed to protect. Every classroom, every exam, and every setback reminded her that success demanded persistence, not permission. After graduation, she entered the aviation industry filled with ideas, but surrounded by doubt. Investors questioned her experience. Competitors questioned her leadership. Some smiled politely while expecting her business to disappear within months. Instead of arguing, she kept building, improving and solving problems until her small aviation technology company earned respect through results alone. Then came the airline's darkest season. Mounting debt threatened thousands of jobs and executives quietly prepared for collapse. Amara studied every report before making a decision few believed possible. She invested her company's resources, reorganized operations, and restored confidence where panic had once ruled. Employees kept their livelihoods, families kept their incomes, and flights continued because one woman refused to let the airline disappear. Despite becoming the majority owner and chair of the board, Amara avoided public attention whenever possible. She never announced her position during personal travel, because she believed every passenger deserved equal respect, whether they owned the airline or purchased the cheapest ticket available. That belief made the present moment especially painful. If she could be judged before anyone checked the facts, what happened to travelers without influence or resources? Back inside first class, Victoria folded her arms with quiet satisfaction. The crew remained convinced they had handled the situation correctly. Around them, passengers continued watching the woman they believed was simply another traveler. None of them realized they were silently judging the very person whose courage, sacrifice, and vision had kept the airline alive long enough to carry them home for Christmas. The final words of Amara's story lingered silently inside the cabin, though no one else could hear them. She remained standing with quiet patience, while the people around her slowly began noticing details they had ignored only minutes before. Confidence no longer filled the air. Doubt had quietly taken its place. Victoria adjusted her scarf and glanced around with a satisfied smile. "You see?" she said softly. "This is exactly how these situations should be handled." No one answered. Across the aisle, a middle-aged passenger slowly unlocked his phone beneath a folded magazine. Without drawing attention, he pressed record. His expression stayed calm, but his decision carried quiet purpose. He was no longer watching a disagreement. He was preserving the truth before someone else rewrote it. Two women seated nearby leaned toward each other. "Did anyone actually check her ticket?" one whispered. "I don't think they did," the other replied. Everything happened so fast. Their conversation ended there, but the question remained floating through first class. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One elderly man removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. Another woman stared through the window instead of toward Amara. None of them had spoken when Victoria first made her accusation. Now the silence felt heavier than any argument. Amara noticed their expressions but offered nothing except the same calm composure she had carried since boarding. She neither demanded apologies nor searched for sympathy. Her quiet dignity slowly became impossible to overlook. The young flight attendant watched everything from the galley entrance. She could almost feel the cabin changing. The loud certainty that had surrounded Victoria minutes earlier was quietly dissolving into uncertainty. Victoria misread every face. "They understand," she muttered confidently. "People know when something doesn't look right." Again? No one responded. The silence no longer belonged to her. Instead, it belonged to every passenger wrestling with uncomfortable thoughts they wished had arrived sooner. One by one, people emotionally stepped away from Victoria without moving an inch. The aircraft still waited at the gate, engines humming patiently outside. Yet inside first class, something far more important had already departed. Blind acceptance was giving way to quiet accountability, and the truth was moving steadily toward the people who had tried hardest to avoid seeing it. The quiet accountability settling over first class remained invisible to most passengers, but beyond the cabin curtain another process had already begun. The cabin manager, alerted by the unusual tension, opened the airline's secure passenger verification system to complete one final routine review before departure. She expected an ordinary confirmation. Instead, the screen revealed information that instantly drained the color from her face. She blinked once and read the profile again. Majority owner. Board chair. Christmas inspection flight. For several seconds, she could not move. The confidential designations remained unchanged no matter how many times she checked them. The woman standing quietly in the aisle was not simply another traveler. She was the person whose decisions shaped the future of the airline itself. The manager hurried toward the senior flight attendant, lowering her voice. "You need to see this, right now." The attendant accepted the tablet with steady hands, but they began trembling before she reached the bottom of the screen. This can't be right." "It is," the manager replied. "I verified it twice." Within moments the information reached the captain. He stared silently at the display, and the memory of asking Amara to move returned with painful clarity. His polite request, meant to preserve order, suddenly felt like the very injustice he had promised himself he would never allow under his command. He closed his eyes briefly. "I never truly checked," he admitted quietly. "No, Captain," the cabin manager answered. "We didn't." Inside first class, Victoria remained comfortably seated, completely unaware of the transformation unfolding around her. She smiled faintly, believing the crew's private conversations confirmed her position. Instead, every glance exchanged between employees carried growing urgency. Their confident movements became measured, careful, almost hesitant. No announcements interrupted the cabin. No dramatic confrontation followed. The crew simply stopped defending the decision they had made and began searching for the safest way to correct it before the mistake grew even larger. Amara noticed the change, but remained exactly as she had been from the beginning. She stood patiently, neither demanding recognition nor displaying satisfaction. Her calm presence seemed untouched by the confidential truth now circulating among the crew. The discovery changed far more than a seating dispute. It exposed how quickly assumptions could replace fairness, how easily authority could overlook evidence, and how silently prejudice could enter professional decisions. Nothing inside that aircraft truly looked different. Yet everyone responsible understood the flight would never return to the ordinary Christmas journey they had expected before the doors closed. The uneasy silence settled deeper across first class. Yet Victoria seemed completely untouched by it. She looked from face to face expecting reassurance, but interpreted every nervous glance as agreement. The crew's hesitation only strengthened her belief that she had been right from the beginning. She folded her hands neatly and spoke with quiet certainty. "I don't understand why everyone suddenly looks so uncomfortable." No one answered. The captain remained near the galley, speaking softly with the cabin manager. Their expressions had changed completely. The confidence they carried earlier had disappeared, replaced by careful words and measured movements. Victoria noticed them whispering and smiled. "I suppose they're finally sorting this out." The senior flight attendant lowered her eyes. She could no longer bring herself to stand beside Victoria, or defend the decision that had humiliated an innocent passenger. Victoria sighed impatiently. This shouldn't be so complicated. Then, with complete confidence, she added, "Money doesn't buy class." The sentence floated through the cabin like cold air. Nobody nodded. Nobody smiled. Instead, several passengers slowly looked toward Amara. A businessman quietly shook his head. An elderly woman whispered to her husband, "That tells us everything we need to know." Victoria heard neither comment. She remained convinced the room still admired her confidence. The young flight attendant stepped backward without speaking. The distance was small, yet everyone noticed it. One by one, the crew unconsciously did the same. No announcement explained their behavior. They simply stopped standing near Victoria. Across the aisle, two passengers ended their conversation the moment Victoria glanced toward them. Another woman turned away and resumed reading, though her eyes never moved across the page. For the first time since boarding, Victoria felt something unfamiliar. Isolation. She frowned. Why is everyone acting so strangely? Again, silence answered her. Amara remained exactly where she stood. She neither celebrated the changing mood, nor looked toward Victoria with satisfaction. Her calm expression never changed. The businessman who had quietly recorded earlier lowered his phone. "I judged too quickly," he whispered to himself. Nearby, another passenger nodded almost imperceptibly. Without realizing it, the cabin had already chosen whom it respected. No speeches had been given. No argument had been won. No raised voice had settled the matter. Character had. Victoria still believed she controlled the moment, but the emotional balance had shifted beyond her reach. The admiration she expected had quietly dissolved into discomfort, distance, and silent disappointment. Even before a single public consequence arrived, her privilege had already begun collapsing from within. Around her, passengers emotionally stepped away without leaving their seats, while Amara's quiet dignity became the center of every thoughtful glance. The flight had not yet departed, but the story inside the cabin had already chosen its direction, and there would be no returning to the assumptions that had started it all. The quiet distance surrounding Victoria continued to grow, though she remained too confident to recognize it. Around her, passengers avoided conversation, while crew members spoke only in brief whispers. The businessman who had recorded the confrontation looked down at his phone one last time before making a simple decision. He pressed upload. No announcement followed. No dramatic music played. The short video quietly left the aircraft through the airport's wireless network and entered a world far larger than the cabin itself. Its caption read only 5 words. "Watch what happened before takeoff." Within seconds, views began climbing. 10, 100, 1,000. The businessman slipped his phone back into his pocket without another glance, unaware that the recording had already started a chain of events impossible to reverse. Outside the aircraft, travelers waiting at nearby gates watched the clip while sipping coffee. Some frowned immediately. "I've seen this before," one woman whispered. "It always starts the same way," another replied. The comments multiplied faster than anyone could read them. She never even raised her voice. "Why didn't the crew check the boarding pass first? This isn't about one seat." By the time the aircraft finally pushed away from the gate, millions of people had already watched the confrontation. Holiday celebrations across the country paused as families passed phones across dinner tables. "Look at this. Can you believe this happened today?" Television producers interrupted scheduled Christmas programming. "We need this story on air immediately." Within minutes, news anchors appeared before cameras. "A disturbing incident aboard a Christmas flight is drawing nationwide attention tonight." The footage replayed repeatedly. Not because people enjoyed watching conflict, because they recognized it. Civil rights advocates described familiar patterns. Behavioral experts discussed unconscious bias. Legal analysts questioned airline procedures. The conversation quickly moved beyond one argument inside first class. Aviation reporters opened archived files. Didn't this airline face similar complaints several years ago? Another journalist answered, "There were reports, but most disappeared without much attention. Old articles resurfaced. Forgotten interviews returned. Complaint records that had gathered digital dust suddenly became relevant again." Former employees watched the broadcast from their homes. One retired flight attendant stared silently at the television before opening her laptop. "I stayed quiet long enough," she wrote. A former pilot followed. "I warned management about inconsistent treatment years ago." Another employee added, "Speaking up usually meant risking your career." One testimony became 10. 10 became hundreds. Passengers from earlier flights joined the growing conversation. "I experienced something similar. My family was treated differently too." They apologized privately but never changed anything. Individual memories slowly connected into one unmistakable pattern. Meanwhile, inside first class, almost nothing appeared different. Passengers remained seated. Seatbelts stayed fastened. The cabin lights glowed softly above them. Amara stood peacefully, unaware that strangers across the country were defending her dignity more loudly than she ever would herself. Victoria remained equally unaware. "They'll realize I was right," she quietly told herself. No one nearby answered. Far away, airline executives' phones erupted with urgent notifications. "Call me immediately. Have you seen the video?" This is becoming a national story. Emergency messages filled executive inboxes faster than assistants could organize them. Board members demanded answers. Public relations teams assembled without waiting for formal instructions. The crisis no longer belonged to airport staff. It had reached the highest levels of leadership. Inside the cabin, silence still ruled. Outside, millions of voices refused to stay silent any longer. By the time the aircraft lifted into the winter sky, public opinion had already shifted. People were no longer debating whether Victoria had been rude. They were asking why incidents like this continued happening despite years of promises, policies, and public statements. And by the time the wheels would eventually touch the runway again, the story waiting at the destination would be far bigger than any passenger on board could imagine. The truth had traveled faster than the airplane itself, ensuring that nothing said behind closed cabin doors could ever be quietly forgotten again. While the aircraft continued its journey, another race had already begun on the ground. Emergency notifications reached every board member, canceling family dinners and Christmas gatherings alike. Within an hour, the executive conference room, filled with anxious faces, open laptops, and ringing phones. What had started as a disagreement over one seat had become a crisis threatening the airline's credibility. No one wasted time with formal greetings. The board chair's seat remained empty. Everyone understood why. The acting vice chair spoke first. "We begin immediately. Every decision made aboard that flight will be reviewed. The captain, the lead flight attendant, the junior attendant, and the cabin manager joined through a secure video connection. Each appeared composed, yet their expressions revealed growing unease. The first question came quietly. When was the boarding pass verified? The captain hesitated. Not immediately. Why not? He lowered his eyes. I relied on the information presented to me. Another executive leaned forward. You relied on a passenger instead of procedure. No one disagreed. Security footage appeared across the large conference screens. Every camera angle replayed the confrontation exactly as it happened. There was no dramatic soundtrack, no emotional narration, only ordinary conversations revealing extraordinary failures. The recording paused repeatedly. Stop there, one director said. The image froze as Amara calmly offered her boarding pass. Why wasn't it examined carefully? Silence answered. The footage continued. Again it paused. This was another opportunity to correct the mistake. Another uncomfortable silence followed. Documents soon replaced video. Archived complaints filled the conference table. Some involved passengers. Others came from employees describing unequal treatment, ignored reports, and hesitation to challenge questionable decisions. One executive slowly turned another page. I remember this complaint. It was closed, someone replied quietly. It was closed, the executive answered, but it was never solved. More files appeared. Different dates, different names, the same patterns. The room grew noticeably quieter with every report reviewed. The acting vice chair folded his hands. We treated every complaint as an isolated incident. The cabin manager spoke softly through the screen. Now they all seem connected. No one challenged her observation. The discussion gradually shifted away from protecting the airline's reputation. Instead, leaders began asking how such failures had survived for so many years without meaningful correction. The captain finally broke the silence. I thought I was keeping peace inside the cabin. You preserved order, an executive replied gently, but not fairness. Those words settled heavily across the room. For several long moments, nobody spoke. The meeting concluded without celebration, reassurance, or carefully crafted optimism. Every executive understood the airline faced something much larger than negative headlines. Public relations alone could never repair the damage if the organization refused to confront its own culture. As chairs quietly slid back and laptops closed, each leader left carrying the same difficult realization. The future of the airline would not depend upon explaining away one Christmas incident. It would depend upon whether they finally possessed the courage to change everything that had allowed it to happen in the first place. Television satellite trucks lined the street outside the airline headquarters before sunrise, their antennas stretching into the cold Christmas sky. Reporters hurried across the sidewalks with microphones already live, while camera operators searched for the best angles before any executive appeared. Holiday music drifting from nearby stores felt strangely out of place beside the growing crowd waiting for answers. Every major network is here, one producer whispered into her headset. Stay ready. The statement could begin at any moment. Another reporter glanced toward the entrance. People aren't waiting for another apology. They want to know why this happened. Inside the headquarters, employees walked through the lobby in complete silence. Security officers politely guided journalists behind the barriers, but even they sensed this was no ordinary press event. Everyone had watched the video. Everyone knew the questions waiting beyond the glass doors. A young receptionist quietly looked at the television mounted on the lobby wall. The same footage continued playing without sound. Amara standing calmly, Victoria pointing toward the seat. crew members hesitating. The images spoke clearly enough without words. A maintenance worker stopped beside the screen and sighed. "Hard to believe this happened on one of our flights," the receptionist answered softly. "Harder to believe nobody stopped it sooner." Neither of them spoke again. Outside, another news anchor adjusted her microphone. "We're standing outside airline headquarters, where executives are expected to address the controversy that has dominated headlines throughout the holiday season. Public pressure continues to grow as millions demand accountability." Nearby, passengers from earlier flights stood quietly behind the media barriers. Some had traveled overnight simply to witness what would happen. Former employees recognized one another without introductions, exchanging small nods instead of conversations. A gray-haired man folded his arms. "I worked here 23 years. His former colleague looked at him. "Then you know this isn't only about one flight." He lowered his eyes. "Yes," he admitted. "That's why today matters." As more cameras went live, social media feeds filled with countdowns, predictions, and live broadcasts from every major outlet. Across the country, families paused holiday breakfast to watch their televisions. Airport lounges displayed the coverage on overhead screens. Travelers waiting for delayed flights stopped scrolling through their phones and looked up together. The headquarters remained closed, but anticipation kept growing. No shouting erupted outside. No angry crowds pushed against the barriers. Instead, thousands waited with unusual patience, as though everyone understood that the next few minutes could define more than one company's future. They could reveal whether dignity, truth, and accountability still mattered when power had every opportunity to look away. Behind the headquarters doors, footsteps echoed toward the conference hall. Outside, every camera focused on the entrance. The microphones were ready. The nation was listening, and before a single statement had been spoken, silence itself had already become the loudest voice in the story. Every reporter expected outrage. The silence that had settled over the conference hall felt almost impossible to breathe through. Cameras remained fixed on Amara, waiting for the emotional response everyone believed would finally arrive. Producers silently counted down through their headsets, expecting the woman who had been publicly humiliated to expose every failure, every name and every painful detail before a national audience. Instead, Amara rested both hands lightly on the podium. She looked across the room without anger. Her eyes briefly met the captain's before moving toward the reporters. Then the executives and finally Victoria, who stood motionless near the edge of the stage. No expression of victory crossed Amara's face, only quiet composure. She took a slow breath before speaking. "I appreciate everyone who came today." Her voice carried naturally across the room without forcing itself above the microphones. "I know many people expected me to speak about what happened on that flight." She paused. "I will." Every person leaned forward. "But first, I want to thank the passengers who chose kindness, the employees who eventually chose truth, and everyone willing to learn from a painful moment." The captain slowly lowered his eyes. The board members exchanged brief, uneasy glances. Victoria folded her arms, still searching for reassurance that never came. Amara continued. "I've spent my life building companies, leading teams, and solving difficult problems." Another pause settled over the room. "But none of those accomplishments mattered when I boarded that aircraft." She looked directly into the nearest camera. They shouldn't have needed to. The conference hall became completely still. Then Amara spoke the sentence that would later appear on newspaper front pages, television broadcasts, classrooms, and company training programs across the country. Respect should never depend on knowing who someone is. No. Applause followed. No reporter interrupted. Several photographers slowly lowered their cameras instead of taking another picture. The sentence seemed to settle over the room before reaching every person listening. Victoria's confident posture weakened for the first time. She replayed every word she had spoken aboard the aircraft, hearing them now through completely different ears. The captain quietly removed his cap and held it against his chest. "I chose peace," he whispered to himself. Then he shook his head. "No, I chose comfort." Beside him, one executive spoke softly enough that only the board members could hear. "We wrote policies." Another answered with visible regret. "But we forgot courage." Across the conference hall, several reporters stopped writing. One young journalist wiped moisture from her eyes before looking back toward the stage. Nobody was looking at Amara as the airline owner anymore. Nobody cared about her title. They simply saw a woman who should have been treated with dignity from the very beginning. Amara stepped back from the microphone without adding another dramatic statement. She didn't need one. Her single sentence had already answered every difficult question. Long after the camera stopped recording and the headlines disappeared, those words would continue echoing wherever people were tempted to judge someone before choosing simple human kindness. The conference hall remained silent after Amara stepped away from the podium. Her words continued hanging in the air, making every prepared statement feel smaller than it had only minutes before. No one seemed eager to speak next because everyone understood that excuses would sound empty beside the truth they had all witnessed. The moderator quietly nodded toward the captain, walked to the microphone with measured steps, removed his cap once more and looked directly into the cameras. "My name is Captain Daniel Harris," he began. "The final decision on that aircraft was mine." He paused, taking responsibility before anyone else could. "I believed I was keeping peace inside the cabin. I now understand I confused peace with convenience." His voice grew heavier. "I asked the wrong person to carry the burden of someone else's prejudice. For that, I offer my sincere apology to Ms. Brooks and to every passenger who trusted my judgment." He stepped back without attempting to justify a single decision. The lead flight attendant slowly approached the podium, her hands trembling. "I saw hesitation on my team's faces," she admitted. "I even felt it myself." She swallowed hard, "but I was afraid that questioning the loudest passenger would create a bigger problem." Tears filled her eyes. "I forgot that protecting fairness is our first responsibility. Order means nothing if it comes at someone else's dignity." She lowered her head before quietly returning to her seat. An executive stepped forward next. "This incident did not begin on one Christmas flight," he said honestly. "It exposed weaknesses we allowed to remain for far too long." Another board member continued. "We reviewed years of reports." He looked toward the audience. "Some complaints received attention. Others did not receive enough. That failure belongs to leadership." No one interrupted. No carefully polished corporate language followed, only uncomfortable honesty. Several reporters glanced at one another, realizing the scripted responses they had expected were disappearing one by one. Near the back of the room, Victoria stood alone. She searched the faces around her, hoping someone might quietly defend her actions. Nobody moved. The captain kept his eyes forward. The crew remained silent. Executives focused on the stage. Even reporters who had questioned Amara earlier avoided looking toward Victoria now. For the first time, she understood what complete isolation felt like. No insults were thrown. Her way. No one demanded punishment. The absence of support carried far more weight than public condemnation ever could. Amara watched quietly, her expression unchanged. When the moderator invited her back to the microphone, she gently shook her head. "The apologies have been heard," she said softly. "Now let the changes matter more than today's words." Several executives nodded in agreement. One reporter quietly wrote that sentence in bold letters across the top of his notebook. As the conference drew toward its conclusion, every explanation had fallen away. Status no longer mattered. Titles offered no protection. Influence carried no authority. Only character remained visible. When people later remembered that extraordinary Christmas flight, they would remember far more than a dispute over a first-class seat. They would remember the quiet dignity of one woman, the humility of those willing to admit their failures, and the lasting truth that integrity always outlives power when every excuse finally disappears. The conference hall remained filled with quiet emotion after the final apology. Reporters expected another dramatic announcement, perhaps lawsuits, dismissals, or demands for harsh punishment. Instead, Amara returned to the podium with the same calm expression she had carried from the beginning. The room sensed that whatever came next would matter just as much as everything already spoken. "I don't want revenge," she said gently. "Revenge only changes who is hurting today. Justice changes who will be protected tomorrow." Her words settled across the audience. "I did not come here to win against one person," she continued. "I came here to make sure fewer people ever experience what happened on that flight." Several executives nodded before the airline's chief operating officer stepped beside her. "Effective immediately," he announced, "every employee, including executives, pilots, flight attendants, customer service teams, and new recruits, will complete mandatory anti-bias education." He looked directly at the cameras. "This training will not be treated as a formality. It will become part of how we evaluate leadership, promotions, and daily performance." The announcement was met with thoughtful silence instead of applause. Amara spoke again. "We're also creating a confidential reporting system." She paused to let the importance of those words sink in. No employee or passenger should ever fear losing opportunities simply because they chose to report discrimination. A reporter raised her hand. "So, complaints won't stay within the same department anymore?" Amara answered immediately. "No." The chief legal officer stepped forward. "Every discrimination complaint will now be reviewed by independent investigators with full authority to examine evidence without interference from internal management." Pens moved quickly across reporters' notebooks. Another executive added, "Findings will be documented, reviewed, and acted upon through transparent procedures." Across the room, several crew members quietly exchanged hopeful glances. One young flight attendant whispered to another, "People like us will finally be heard." Her colleague smiled faintly. "Maybe the next person won't have to stand alone." Amara heard them but said nothing. She simply smiled. "Leadership must also change," she continued. "Technical skill alone will never qualify someone to guide others." She looked toward the board members. Character, empathy, fairness, and the courage to question comfortable assumptions will now carry equal weight in leadership evaluations. The board chair nodded without hesitation. "We unanimously support these reforms." Victoria remained near the back wall, listening quietly. She had expected her name to be repeated before every camera. Instead, Amara never mentioned her once. The omission carried its own lesson. This moment had become larger than one argument, one passenger, or one mistake. It had become about building something better. A veteran journalist slowly lowered his notebook. "I've covered scandals for 30 years," he murmured to the reporter beside him. "I've rarely seen someone turn public pain into institutional change," the younger reporter replied softly. "That's probably why people will remember this." As the conference reached its conclusion, Amara thanked the employees willing to learn, the passengers who chose honesty, and the public for demanding accountability without encouraging hatred. She stepped away from the podium as quietly as she had approached it. The cameras continued following her, but she never looked back. She understood that the greatest victory was never proving who she was. It was helping create an airline where no passenger would ever need extraordinary success, hidden authority, or public recognition to receive the simple respect every human being deserved from the moment they stepped aboard. The first phone call brings silence instead of support from the people she once trusted. The morning after the press conference, Victoria woke earlier than usual, convinced the worst had already passed. She poured herself coffee, picked up her phone, and dialed the business partner who had called her every Christmas morning for nearly 12 years. The call rang until voicemail answered. She frowned but left a polite message, telling herself everyone was simply busy with family celebrations. She tried another number. No answer. A third. Straight to voicemail again. Her confidence weakened just enough to make her pause. She refreshed her inbox, expecting reassuring emails from sponsors, board members, or longtime friends. Instead, only a few short messages waited. "We'll be reviewing our relationship after the holidays. Please direct future communication through legal counsel. We believe some distance is appropriate at this time." There were no insults, no accusations, just carefully chosen words that felt colder than anger. Victoria whispered, "After everything we've built together?" No one answered. She called her assistant. The young woman hesitated before speaking. "I'm sorry, Victoria. I've been instructed not to discuss company matters today." "Instructed by who?" "I'm really sorry." The line went dead. Victoria stared at the silent phone in disbelief. Yesterday, these same people had laughed beside her at holiday events, praised her leadership, and promised years of partnership. Today, they couldn't spare a conversation. Across town, news channels continued replaying Amara's calm statement about respect. Viewers weren't talking about wealth anymore. They were talking about character. Victoria switched off the television, unable to hear another commentator. "This can't be happening," she muttered. Yet every notification told the same story. Meeting. Request disappeared from her calendar. Holiday. Luncheon invitations quietly vanished. A corporate dinner she'd planned to attend was marked canceled without explanation. For the first time, Victoria noticed something she had never experienced before. Silence. Not the peaceful silence of Christmas morning, but the uncomfortable silence left behind when people choose distance. Instead of confrontation, no dramatic argument had taken place. Nobody had shouted at her. Nobody had demanded revenge. The people she depended on simply stopped reaching toward her. She placed the phone on the table and looked through the large windows of her home. Outside, families carried wrapped gifts. Children laughed in the crisp winter air, and neighbors greeted one another warmly. Inside, only the quiet hum of the refrigerator answered her breathing. Victoria finally understood that losing trust rarely begins with a public scandal. It begins with one unanswered call, then another, until the silence says everything. Words no longer need to explain. The sunlight had long faded from the mansion, yet Victoria remained exactly where she had been for hours, sitting in the same chair facing the towering Christmas tree. The colorful lights blinked in perfect rhythm, but their warmth never reached her anymore. Every ornament hanging from the branches reminded her that appearances had fooled people for years, including herself. She once believed respect naturally followed wealth, influence, and social standing. Now she understood those things could disappear much faster than they were earned. Soft holiday music continued playing through the house, repeating familiar songs she had loved since childhood. Today the melodies sounded strangely distant, as though they belonged to someone else's Christmas. She reached for the remote and lowered the volume until only silence remained. For the first time in many years, she wanted to hear nothing except her own thoughts. Her phone rested beside her untouched. Earlier she had refreshed the screen countless times, hoping someone might finally call. Friends, business partners, charity leaders, even distant relatives had remained silent. No angry messages arrived. No one demanded explanations. Their absence spoke more clearly than any criticism ever could. The people she expected to defend her had quietly stepped away without announcing their departure. Victoria slowly stood and walked toward the hallway, where family photographs stretched across the wall. In one picture, her parents smiled proudly beside a much younger version of herself. She traced the edge of the frame with her fingertips. "What happened to you?" she whispered. The empty hallway offered no answer. She remembered believing she had always been the respectable one, the successful one, the woman others admired. Yet one decision aboard that Christmas flight had exposed something far deeper than a simple mistake. It revealed habits she had never questioned and assumptions she had mistaken for common sense. Outside, children's laughter drifted through the winter air as neighboring families gathered around dinner tables. Warm lights glowed behind nearby windows, carrying voices filled with celebration. Victoria watched quietly from behind the glass, close enough to see happiness yet unable to feel part of it. She finally returned to the living room and gently switched off the Christmas tree. Darkness settled across the mansion almost instantly. The house remained beautiful. The furniture, paintings, and decorations had not changed. Only the woman living among them had. As Christmas night quietly came to an end, Victoria accepted a truth she could no longer escape. Wealth could buy comfort. Influence could open doors. Status could earn attention. But none of them could restore trust once character had been revealed. The silent mansion stood as the final witness, reminding her that the greatest home anyone builds is not made of stone or glass, but of kindness, humility, and the respect they leave behind. The quiet lesson Victoria carried into Christmas night did not end with her alone. By the time the next morning arrived, its impact had already begun reaching the people whose choices would shape every future flight. Before sunrise, airline employees walked through the terminal with thoughtful expressions, greeting one another more softly than usual. The familiar sounds of rolling luggage and boarding announcements filled the airport, yet something had undeniably changed. The memory of the Christmas incident remained fresh, reminding every crew member that professionalism meant far more than following procedures. Inside the training center, captains, flight attendants, gate agents, and managers gathered without the usual casual conversations. No one tried to minimize what had happened. Instead, the room welcomed honest reflection. The lead instructor placed a single photograph of the aircraft on the screen before speaking. "We're not here to remember our worst day," she said quietly. "We're here to make sure it never becomes someone else's." No one looked away. The young flight attendant who had first questioned the passenger manifest found herself invited to speak. At first she hesitated. "I saw something," she admitted. "I spoke up. But when I wasn't heard, I stopped trying. I keep wondering if I should have tried again." A senior captain answered before anyone else could. "You shouldn't have carried that burden alone," he said. "From today forward, none of you will." Those words settled across the room with quiet strength. The airline introduced new hiring standards that measured compassion alongside technical skill. Training sessions abandoned memorized presentations in favor of real passenger stories, encouraging employees to discuss uncomfortable situations openly, instead of pretending they could never happen again. Every case study carried one simple reminder: fairness is decided one conversation at a time. Managers also announced that any employee, regardless of position, could challenge a questionable decision without fear of punishment. The room remained silent for a moment before several younger crew members exchanged relieved smiles. For the first time, speaking honestly no longer felt dangerous. Weeks passed and passengers gradually noticed subtle changes. Flight attendants listened more carefully before responding. Boarding disagreements were resolved through patience rather than assumptions. Every traveler received the same calm respect, whether they boarded wearing business suits or simple holiday sweaters. Public trust returned slowly, earned through consistent actions instead of polished advertisements. The airline never claimed perfection, but its employees began proving each day that they were willing to learn from painful mistakes. As aircraft lifted into the sky carrying families, students, workers, and dreamers toward new destinations, the crew carried something just as important. They carried the understanding that every boarding pass belonged to a human being before it, belonged to a seat number. That quiet truth became the airline's strongest policy, ensuring the legacy of one unforgettable Christmas flight would be measured not by the injustice it revealed, but by the fairness it inspired every day afterward. The renewed sense of purpose spreading through the airline reached far beyond airports and boardrooms. While employees embraced change, one passenger carried a different kind of memory home. Several days after Christmas, the little girl who had quietly watched everything from her seat still thought about the woman who never shouted, never argued, and never stopped showing dignity. The holiday gifts she had received were already scattered across her bedroom, but the flight remained the one memory she could not put away. When school reopened, her teacher smiled and handed each student a simple assignment. "Write about your Christmas vacation," she said. The little girl stared at the blank paper for a long moment. Other children eagerly described presents, family dinners, and holiday games. She picked up her pencil and began writing about the airplane instead. That evening, she carried the notebook into the kitchen where her mother prepared dinner. "Mom," she asked softly, "why were people mean to the nice lady?" The question stopped every movement in the room. Her mother slowly placed the spoon on the counter, searching for words that would make sense without hiding the truth. "Sometimes," she answered gently, "people decide who someone is before they learn anything about them. That isn't fair and it isn't right." The little girl lowered her eyes, but she wasn't mean back. "No," her mother whispered. "She showed everyone what real strength looks like." Those words stayed with the child. Instead of drawing Christmas trees for the final page of her assignment, she sketched an airplane filled with smiling passengers of different backgrounds sitting together. Above the picture she carefully printed, "Everyone deserves kindness before judgment." Her mother read the page twice before quietly wiping away tears. She realized schools could teach reading and mathematics, but compassion usually began inside ordinary conversations at home. Weeks later, the notebook remained tucked safely inside the little girl's backpack. Headlines slowly disappeared, Television crews packed away their cameras and adults moved on with busy lives. She did not. Whenever she saw an airplane crossing the sky, she remembered the quiet woman who had answered cruelty with calm instead of anger. More importantly, she remembered the question that no grown-up could answer perfectly. In its innocence lived the story's greatest hope. If children learned to see people before stereotypes, tomorrow could become kinder than yesterday. That simple question would outlive every apology, policy, and headline because it carried the future inside it, inspiring hearts everywhere with lasting compassion forever. The renewed sense of purpose spreading through the airline reached far beyond airports and boardrooms. While employees embraced change, Amara finally turned onto the quiet street where her parents had always lived. The flashing cameras and crowded microphones were gone. Only warm porch lights waited patiently, welcoming her home again. She stepped from the car carrying one small travel bag. Before she could knock, the front door opened. Her mother hurried forward and wrapped her in a silent embrace. Her father joined them, placing one gentle hand on her shoulder. No speeches were needed. The comfort of family quietly dissolved days of tension she had carried. "You're finally home," her mother whispered. "I miss this more than anything," Amara replied, her voice breaking for the first time. Nobody mentioned interviews, headlines, or the viral video. Instead, they helped her hang her coat and guided her toward the dining table. The meal was simple: roasted vegetables, fresh bread, warm soup, and homemade pie. Between quiet laughter and familiar stories, the weight inside her heart slowly lifted. Young nieces and nephews raced through the hallway, laughing as they chased one another with new toys. Their carefree joy filled every room with life. Watching them reminded Amara that hope never needed headlines to survive. Sometimes it simply sounded like children laughing together. After dinner, her father poured hot tea and smiled gently. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not because people know your name, because you remembered theirs." Amara lowered her eyes. "I wasn't sure I was strong enough." "You were kind when kindness was hardest," her mother answered. "That's real strength." Those words reached deeper than awards or public praise ever could. Later, everyone gathered beside the Christmas tree. Outside, television stations still discussed investigations and reforms, but nobody turned on the television. Inside that home, conversations centered on recipes, childhood memories, future birthdays, and plans for another family gathering. The world could keep debating the flight. This house chose peace instead. As the evening quietly drew to a close, Amara looked around the table and realized the Christmas she had almost lost had become the one her family would treasure forever. Justice had restored fairness, but love had restored her heart. Surrounded by those who valued her long before success, she finally felt completely home, carrying hope into every tomorrow with lasting peace, quiet gratitude, unwavering faith, and endless compassion for everyone. As time quietly moved forward, the Christmas flight became remembered for far more than one painful confrontation. It revealed how ordinary moments expose extraordinary character, reminding everyone that courage often begins with one quiet decision to protect another person's dignity, even when silence feels easier than speaking the simple truth. Amara's greatest achievement was never owning the airline or commanding influence. Her true victory came from answering prejudice with calm compassion, proving that strength grows from character before titles, wealth, applause, recognition, or authority ever arrive. That example inspired countless strangers to choose empathy over assumption every single day afterward. Victoria's downfall truly began when she judged a stranger before hearing her story. Pride quietly replaced curiosity. Assumptions defeated understanding, and unchecked prejudice slowly built the loneliness she eventually faced. Her greatest punishment became recognizing the truth too late herself, alone with lasting regret and difficult self-reflection every quiet day. The airline changed its policies, training, leadership, and culture, but the deepest transformation happened inside passengers, employees, parents, and children who witnessed the story. They promised themselves never again to ignore quiet injustice simply because someone louder seemed confident or powerful enough to intimidate everyone around them in silence again. Justice endured because it repaired tomorrow instead of destroying yesterday. Rather than seeking revenge, Amara chose accountability that strengthened people, protected future passengers, encouraged honest leadership, and proved forgiveness can exist beside responsibility without weakening either principle or sacrificing fairness for temporary comfort or applause ever again afterward. Together always. Every passenger carries an invisible story hidden behind a boarding pass. No appearance, accent, clothing, skin color, profession, or destination reveals the full journey someone has survived. Respect should always arrive before assumptions because humanity deserves understanding first, question second, and judgment last, if ever at all in life together. First class was never the highest place. Real honor belongs to people who choose kindness without expecting recognition, defend fairness without seeking applause, and protect others even when nobody seems willing to stand beside them. Those choices define lasting greatness every single day of our shared human journey ahead always. Long after the cameras disappeared and the aircraft landed, one quiet lesson remained. Every journey offers a choice between pride and compassion. Destinations eventually fade, but the way people treat one another becomes the memory that travels farthest through every generation that follows, with hope intact forever afterward. Together still, the highest seat on any flight is never reserved for first class. It belongs to those who refuse to surrender their dignity when others try taking it away, because character cannot be purchased, inherited, demanded, only lived through everyday compassion, humility, courage, and unwavering respect for everyone without exception always. The story ends, but its message continues wherever ordinary people choose compassion instead of prejudice. Every classroom, workplace, neighborhood, airport, and family holds another opportunity to protect someone's dignity. Whenever kindness defeats assumption, humanity quietly rises again, proving the greatest journeys begin inside the heart before any destination is ever reached.